Hello and welcome to another episode on the White Dog Garage YouTube channel. My name is Bob. In this episode, I'm going to do something about this wonky old lamp base in our bedside lamp. We've had it quite a few years, and over the time it is slowly just collapsing. So stay tuned while I show you what I do. The original lamp base was made adjustable in all directions. After years of use, we only need two positions, centre of the bed and side of the bed. So my new design is a simple crane arm, but with a much stronger pivot base. Raiding the scrap bin for materials, I gathered 2 lengths of tube that will form the post and arm of the crane, a length of round to make the pivot shaft, and a piece of pipe and some pieces of flat bar that I will weld together to form the base. I also found a piece of brass that I will be using to make the end plug that the lamp head slides into. I started with the brass piece, which I chucked up in the 3-jaw chuck on the lathe. This piece of brass is an offcut from another job. The end being faced off is the original round bar, and the rest of the piece was already partly machined, but at a bigger diameter than I need. Reversing the plug in the chuck, I then proceeded to turn down the machined end to a diameter that would give me a sliding fit in the tube that I would be using to make the arm. I've chosen brass for the end because the actual lamp head that goes in is made of steel, and if you're going to be sliding something in and out and around in a bushing, if you like, then it's better that the two metals not be particularly compatible, and steel and brass is a good fit for a moving joint. Before I go on, I then check that the fit in the tube is the nice sliding fit that I wanted. With the plug back in the lathe, this time with the knob end facing out, I proceed to drill out the centre of the plug. The internal diameter of the plug will be bored out to 15 millimeters. However, as I will be brazing the plug into the end of the arm, and there is a possibility of some heat distortion, I'm only drilling it out to 13 millimeters at this stage, and will take it to the final diameter after I've brazed it into the arm. Brass has a small amount of lead in it, which acts as a natural lubricant, so I don't use any cutting fluid. With the plug done, it is on to brazing it into the arm. Brazing is not welding, and the technique relies on capillary action on the part of the filler rod to infiltrate the joint. This is why I've made the plug a sliding fit in the tube. I'm using brass rods coated with flux to braze the joint, but I have also made a solution of boric acid flux that I will use to coat the joint in preparation for brazing. I'm using an oxyacetylene torch to heat the joint, but it could equally be done with an LPG air torch, a propane air torch. A MAP torch, as the temperature required is quite low in metal terms. With the plug sitting proud of the tube, I coat it with flux. Push it home, and then proceed to heat the joint. I focus most of the heat on the brass plug as it is the heaviest component. and when things are nice and red, I add the brass filler rod, just melting it so that the brass flows between the inside of the tube and the brass end. Happy with the result, and when it has cooled down, I return the arm to the lathe and proceed to turn down the brass end to match the outside diameter of the tube. I start by locking the saddle and using the compound slide to take off the lumpy parts. I then revert to enabling the saddle drive and using that to bring the diameter of the end down to that of the tube arm. With that done, I then drill out the internal diameter to give a sliding fit for the lamp head unit. The arm will be set at an angle of 105 degrees to the pivot, and I need to cut the top of the post tube to match this angle. I'm using the bandsaw for this, and I have made a diagonal cut at 105 degrees across the end of a piece of ply, and I'm using this to set the angle of the blade. The off-cutter tube that I'm using to make the post is relatively short, so I'm using the arm to balance the other side and the vice jaw. The tube is thin-walled and the bandsaw cuts through it quite quickly. With the angle cut, I then use the bench grinder to scallop the end of the post where it joins to the arm. I then made use of my piece of ply to fix the angle between the arm and the post for tacking the joint. In addition, I am using some pieces of scrap metal to hold the joint in place whilst I weld it. Again, I have reached for my oxyacetylene torch to do the welding. Actually, to be honest, it was still there from the brazing, but it does make short work of welding thin wall tube. Surprisingly, despite the oxyacetylene torch burning at nearly 3,500 degrees Celsius, the piece of ply is charred but not incinerated at the end. The power cord will run down the inside of the crane arm, so I'm using a drill to create a hole where the post joins the arm tube. A big drill manages to snag the thin wall tube several times, leaving me wondering whether I should have swapped the cordless drill for one of my high torque corded units. My final job on the arm is to drill and tap a hole for the screw that will hold the lamp head in position. I'm reusing the one from the existing lamp unit, and the thread is M4, which is a diameter of 4mm and a pitch of 0.7mm. I start by drilling the hole for the thread. The size of the hole should be 3.3mm, but I'm using a 3.2mm drill that I have to hand for this hole. Of course, a small diameter tap in a tight hole can be a recipe for disaster, but I take it easy with lots of cutting paste. I did test the threaded hole with the screw at the end, but apparently I didn't video that bit, so you'll have to take my word for it that it works. So that was the crane arm all done, and at this stage I decided the video was getting a bit too long. So I've decided to cut it into parts, and this is going to be the end of part 1, and hopefully we're going to wrap it up in part 2 with the build of the pivot base and the actual install in the bedroom. And if you haven't already subscribed to the channel and you want to see part 2, well, the best way to do that is to hit the subscribe bar down below. While you're there, ding the bell so that you're reminded by YouTube when part 2 comes out. Thank you once again for watching.